Fantastic. So today I have the pleasure of interviewing Bernardo Cabot and Professor Dimitrios Buhalis. Welcome to this session. And also it is an absolute honor to have you here, especially with the wealth of information the both of you carry. So thank you once again on behalf of Hotelschool The Hague. To dive deep into the questions that we had prepared, if I can start with Dimitrios, when the pandemic first began, you had warned the industry to brace for impact. Do you think it's something that they really did? Did they really brace for impact? And if not, what should they have done?
It's a very interesting thing what was happening. I kept my eyes in China because at the time I was in hospital in Greece with my mother, and we're very much involved with anything that had to do with virus because it was a very vulnerable environment. And so I started getting the vibes quite early. So I started shouting, brace, brace, brace to the industry. The industry, of course, doesn't want to know bad news. And we are creatures of habit. So we are all thinking at that time that it's going to stay in China, it's not going to come over. And once we kind of start following, we could see that it was coming over. And the second thing was that the implications were quite severe. At the time, we thought that the summer is going to come and we are not going to be as infected, especially in the south of Europe, because people will go outside and that will be a factor. And in fact, it worked like that, but it influenced the markets and influenced a lot of different kind of facilities and also transportation primarily. So in the beginning, I was kind of labeled as pessimistic from the industry, and some people used worse kind of terminology to describe what I was saying. But I kind of felt that I could see the danger, and I really want to warn people to prepare for the danger, because if they had prepared, they could be in a better position to actually manage what was happening.
No, absolutely. I do agree with you, that there were some signs coming and you did warn the industry to brace for impact that COVID's bringing along. So Bernardo, that shifts my next question to you. In terms of economic recovery, China seems to have really taken the lead over there post-COVID, or at least the post-COVID era that they are in. And is there something that we and other countries could learn from that? What led China to sort of like recover to that extent?
I just landed in Shanghai just after Christmas 2019. So just arriving to Shanghai from visiting my relatives in Spain, we suddenly started to hear about a potential outbreak in Wuhan. So we had, let me say in that way, we have 3 or 4 months at the beginning of 2020, extremely difficult in China, because we didn't know what was really happening. And obviously, suddenly the economy collapsed. And basically at that time, our main target was to survive under the present circumstances, right? Obviously, our hotels were closed and everyone was in panic. We didn't know what to do. But now when I look backwards, I learned a lot of this experience, because obviously we had the uncertainty of being the first one suffering with this situation. But at the same time, we had the opportunity to advise and teach the ones where then in Europe and in the Americas, the pandemic arrived later, right? So we were very fortunate to help them to manage the situation, let me say, not in a proper way, but in a better way. So look, after so many months, I think the advantage of China can be summarized in 3 main aspects. Number 1 is critical mass. China with 1.4 billion people, I'm not saying can survive with the rest of the world, but the position is absolutely different, because one of the topics we will discuss probably later is the weight of the domestic market. So China, once the situation was, let me say in that way, under certain control, came back to normal because of the power of the domestic market. So when you have a critical mass, the situation is different. Number 2 is leadership. So what I learned here is when you have this kind of crisis that no one could imagine, when you have a clear leadership, you are more powerful. because everyone goes in the same direction, right or wrong. But the leadership is something we should consider when we want to beat this situation, when we want to recover. And the third point, in my opinion, that makes the difference is the use of technology. Yeah. Look, after a couple of months here in China, we were all living with a QR code with 3 colors, green, yellow, and red. So everyone was monitored. And from the very beginning, we knew exactly the situation of everyone. So when we join critical mass, leadership, and technology, so then you feel safer, and your expectations of recovery are higher. And that's why China is leading the recovery, because in my opinion, they are very good in these 3 specific points.
No, absolutely. I think you brought some really good insights over there, with the 3 critical points of, having a critical mass, having good leadership, and also having technology. And that sort of leads into my next question for you, Dimitrios, is do you think there are any long-term effects, or is there a long-term impact due to the fact that China had a swifter recovery as compared to other markets, perhaps?
I think I would like to add to what Bernardo said, is the 2 things. One is China had dealt with SARS before, and they had 10 years of experience. I don't think anybody in Europe or in the Americas had any understanding what the pandemic was. In Africa, we had Ebola, but it was very localized. The second thing is that the Chinese people, they follow their governments for a whole range of reasons, and they follow advice. Trying to get the Spanish or the Greeks to follow their governments, it's a challenge and a half. And the third thing was that the systems that came into place, they were really draconian from the beginning. Yeah. In what we've seen in many European countries, it took a lot of time and a lot of persuasion for people to understand, and their freedom was kind of overwhelming the process, and we still find that, and there are a lot of issues. Now, longer term, I think COVID is going to leave a range of things behind. Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest thing is digitization. We have moved about 5 to 10 years in terms of digital preparedness and how we are engaging with different organizations. And I think that's something that we'll see in tourism for a long time. The second thing, which is a good thing, is that all of a sudden, governments around the world, they realize how important tourism is. And they realize that for the economy and for the regional kind of development, and also consumers realize how important it is to go out and have a meal or travel or for their mental health. I don't think that tourism has ever been in the agenda so much. And the last year, we've been so much discussion about tourism. And the third thing is that we are kind of start looking to what tourism is going to look like in the future. And a lot of people are jumping into saying things like it's going to go towards sustainability or it's going to go towards individualization. I think tourism will be tourism. And I think a lot of people will kind of go out and enjoy the facilities and the experience that we are creating. I think what I think for me is going to be the major thing is what I call real-time tourism that's based on ambient intelligence, meaning that we will understand the conditions, and because we will understand the conditions, we will optimize our experience and the impact for the destinations and the industry. So it's kind of bringing together the demand and the supply within the contextual kind of situation and using technology to optimize the outcome of both of them.
No, absolutely. I think those are some good points as well. And I really like that you mentioned about having this appreciation for tourism that was a bit lacking in the past. Especially with the whole notion of home fatigue, without staying at home for so long, you really want to travel, and it really makes you feel you really have an appreciation for perhaps things that were taken for a bit granted. So Bernardo, when we
and if I go back to what you just mentioned, and especially from The Hague, a lot of people were talking about over tourism.
Yeah.
And we went from over tourism to absolutely no tourism. And now you understand the impacts of what we were discussing before.
Well, the adversity can be a good teacher, you know. And then when I think about that, and you know, about what Dimitrios just said, is Bernardo, are you seeing any massive changes and perhaps a kind of traveler segments, perhaps, you know? Are we seeing suddenly a big rise in local tourism? Is it there to stay, or can we start expecting to have more international tourism to begin as well in the coming short or perhaps long term as well in the next 2 to 3 years?
Look, I would like to share two concepts and one experience. Two concepts is about what I live in China, and even in some of the countries I manage in Southeast Asia, where the situation is very stable, like Vietnam, for example. The word, obviously, probably this is applicable worldwide, but the word is domestic travel. So that's something that is totally different from the past. What is happening actually in China is the Chinese consumer is discovering China. It's amazing, but in the past, the Chinese consumer was focused in international travel, and they didn't know about their own country. And this country is amazing. You can fly 5 hours over China. So what happens is domestic now is the word. But the second word, in my opinion, is revenge. People is traveling now in China impulsively. Look, I can give you an example, a real example. Our hotels in China in March, April will have an average occupancy of 68, 69, 70%. And the average room rate is increasing. So the demand is increasing every single day. So we have pickups of 2-3% occupancy per day, which is absolutely amazing. And what is more interesting, if you look on the books for next month, there is nothing. So basically we start the month with 10% occupancy and we close the month at 80%. So is last minute, is domestic, is revenge. And I am sure when the international markets are open, we will have exactly the same situation all over around the world. So the two words are domestic and be careful. We have to be prepared for the next future.
Yeah.
And related of what happens during the COVID-19 pandemic situation in China is, as many other hotel companies, we were prepared in order to protect our guests. In fact, we created the program Stay Safe with Melia, audited by Bureau Veritas as an international program. But you know what? In my China hotels, our guests, they don't want to know anything about that. After, let me say it that way, after the COVID-19 situation, they want to go back to normal. So my conclusion is, in the next future, when everything goes back to normal, the consumer will understand that you have all the programs in place, but they don't want to see it. So basically, we will go forward, but without impacting the experience of the guest. That's what I perceived in the situation, which is basically normal in China now.
No, I think that's some great insights as well. You know, you definitely must be a difficult position to be a revenue manager in these times. You know, if you're doing your forecasting, because you're getting your last minute pickups. So so you're on the books right now may not be the best prediction of how your month ends as well. So that is definitely something to keep a lookout for. But you know, if we sort of move towards the Western world, and Dimitrios, perhaps you can help us a bit here. You know, if we talk about maybe Southern European countries, let's take Greece for example. Do you think there are any long-term impacts because of this whole the standstill that COVID-19 has created? Are there any social or economic impacts that countries such as these could face?
Yeah, let me go to the previous point. I think what we see is the end of planning and the beginning of agility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you really need to be agile and you really need to be very, very fast. And some countries, some cultures are much better in operating in agile environments, partly because they are not very good planners, but they are improvising at the end. So Greece is one of these countries. But people in the UK, for example, they find really, really difficult, or in Holland for this matter, they find really difficult to cope with the situation, because in societies where you are planning and you are booking your holidays 8 months in advance, it's kind of very, very difficult to operate. And equally from the hospitality and the tourism sector, we are probably facing the collapse of the tour operators, because the tour operators do not get any deposits. And if you don't get any deposits, the whole cash flow situation, the liquidity situation is under enormous pressure right now. So we will see long-term impacts on the industry, and those people who survive will be those who are very agile and they can operate at the last minute. Like Bernardo said, you'll see your bookings week by week, which find, staffing, getting the right material in, getting your yield management, revenue management operating. It's a nightmare. But that is where we are going. And I think those people who can actually prepare and operate in this kind of environment will be winning enormously. And funny enough, the Bournemouth beach, which on my background here, they've had a fantastic summer last year, and they'll have a fantastic summer this year because of domestic tourism, because a lot of people will be coming in. But they are learning to adapt how to operate in a very different environment. And we pray every day that the weather will be like that day that we took this picture. It doesn't happen it's okay, but praying is good. Now, as far as the south of Europe is concerned, I think the impacts are enormous, and especially in smaller countries that the domestic tourism is not very big.
Yeah.
Spain is good because it has got quite a lot of big domestic market, nothing to cover the international market that's losing. But Greece is much more problematic because the domestic market is very small in comparison. There are 10 million people, and we're receiving normally in Greece about 30 million tourists per year. So you cannot really cover the void with domestic market. The other thing is, because of the islands, a lot of the transportation was based on air transportation. Yeah. And that has been really, really hit, while surface transportation has been much more approachable. The impacts are enormous. And don't forget that after the health situation with COVID, there is an economic tsunami that's coming. And that economic tsunami will affect both the domestic markets and the international markets. The markets of origin, so Holland, the UK, in the UK, we've got a lot of companies that they are closing, a lot of people who are becoming unemployed, a lot of shops that were going long haul, they may come closer. We've seen that in any economic crisis, and therefore they'll kind of downsize on their travel potential. But it will mean that a lot of people will not be able to travel in the future, or they're not going to be taking, or they'll downsize from 2 weeks to 1 week, or we'll see a lot of things. But there's an economic tsunami that is going to hit us. On the positive side, what we've learned is how to operate from wherever we are.
Yeah.
The three of us were based in totally different ways, and we are managing to broadcast this nicely. That's going to be broadcasted from a fourth location to the world. So there's a bit about what we call digital nomads, and people who will kind of go and work from wherever they are, because they never had the opportunity to actually do that. Why do I need to be in Bournemouth to work in Bournemouth? Yeah. I can be in Shanghai, or I can be in Mumbai, or I can be in Hague, and I can still do exactly what I need to do and then enjoy the rest of the resources. Because if you see, up to now, we're almost prisoners of our work. We had to locate where the work was. And sometimes this works nicely, but sometimes you kind of, you can have the freedom of moving around and exploring different things. I think we will learn to live in a different way, especially those of us who do not necessarily need to work with our hands, and we do not need to produce physical things. Those of us who are in services will operate in many different ways, which we'll need to explore in the future.
Absolutely. I was also reading some nice articles about countries also starting to become a little bit more flex on digital nomad visas, perhaps to sort of stimulate some more travelers. So that's indeed a good point. But just keeping a lookout on time, before we round off, I have to ask you about the $1 million question that every hospitality graduate wants to know. What advice do you have for students who are currently graduating, especially from hospitality study?
Okay, in my case, I would like to advise all of them, all of you, about Asia Pacific and specifically China, because usually the Westerns, we do not have focus on this part of the world. And in my opinion, after 11 years working in North and South Asia, what I can tell you is, and 30 years in Meliá Hotels International, in different positions in America and in Europe, what I can tell you is my prediction is the next 10 years in hospitality industry will be dramatically impacted by the Chinese traveler. And my recommendation is it's better you start preparing yourself and your companies in order to cope with this possibility. You have two options. You have the options to manage and the option to ignore. But if you ignore China, and Asia in general, in terms of hospitality, probably you will be out of the picture relatively soon. That's number one. Number two is I would like to encourage the students about the skill, to develop the skill of managing diversity. Yeah. I think it's extremely important in hospitality because diversity, when you manage well the diversity, your experience is much more rich for your customers and for yourself. But this is something I am not sure in the academia we are investing enough time training our people. And number three, a message is please remember in the present, but especially in the future, no one will remember your room. It's not about hardware, it's about software. So everything is very transparent now, and you have to be focused in the experience. Number one, because you want to catch the customer forever, your guest. Number two, because whatever you produce in your hotel as an experience will be shared immediately with the world through the social media. So be prepared in the world of the experiences. Forget the hardware, it's about software.
Yeah, think a little bit more about the experience economy and what that has to bring. And Dimitrios, would you have any tips for our recent hospitality graduates?
I think Bernardo is spot on all his advice, but I'd like to bring a couple of more things, especially when you are recent, because a lot of the kids that are coming out of programs, from university programs, not only in tourism and hospitality, but on everything, they're probably 22, 23 years old, and they are really, really disappointed. And what we need to recognize is that most of these kids didn't really have any major problems in their life so far. The last 20 years have been pretty good around the world. And I think it's a matter of understanding what resilience is and how to operate. First of all, shit happens, okay? And nobody really wants to have a situation like that. And that's why when I start calling brace, 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 I kept telling the industry that no plane would like to fall from the sky. But when that happens, it's really what makes leadership and what makes people move forward is the ability to deal with that adversity. And I kind of brought the example of Captain Sully, who managed to save that flight when went down. So what I'm saying to my students and those students who are graduating recently is that the situation will be bad for a few years, number one. So take the advantage of the time you've got to learn different skills. You may learn Chinese, so you can go and work for Bernardo in China, or you may learn some particular things and you really specialize on those things. So take advantage of the time. That's one thing. The second thing is learn to live with little money and learn to live in a situations where you are resilient. The third thing is volunteer for your communities. Right now, there's a lot of volunteering that's happening around the world in health services and also helping people who are in need. And the tourism and hospitality people, this is what we do. We care about people. That's on our DNA, and it's a global phenomenon. So there are so many examples around the world where there are so many volunteering kind of services. And I say always to my students, okay, it will take a couple of years to kind of go to the situation where we would like to go. In the meanwhile, take advantage of the time, survive and show resilience, show innovatives. Look at the opportunities as well, because there may be a lot of places that their rent is much cheaper, that there are places where you can invest a little bit in terms of your time and your effort, and you create a new business model, innovate in terms of something that you're bringing forward. And the final thing is volunteer for the community. Be useful to the world. And of course, I say also that when you are applying, these 2 years that you may not be able to function in a proper way needs to show in your CV in a particular way that you've actually done something useful. So don't put down, I watched Netflix for 2 years, but make sure that what you're doing is useful to yourself, to your community, and to the world.
Well, absolutely. You know, if I just to sum it up from the two of you, I think the whole notion of AQ, EQ, adversity quotient, dealing with resilience, emotional quotient, dealing with, emotions of others, a community, I think are really big. So there's definitely soft skills that one should emphasize on, especially being a recent graduate. So both Dimitrios and Bernardo, thank you so much for being here today. It's such a pleasure to hear your insights. And I wish you luck for all ventures ahead, and I can't wait to catch you up again. Bernardo, you're more than free to visit Mumbai or India, and Dimitrios will be more than happy to host you in India as well. Have a lovely day, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you.